Hey, I knew I'd run into you again. Welcome back. Am I clean? The other day I spent probably 10 minutes recording this little intro for an ad, and I had like a dusty booger right there the whole time. I didn't know it until the very end. Anyways, welcome to the Fireside. My name is Jake. I'm excited to have you back for a brand new episode, or if this is your first time, I'm excited to have you here for the first time for a brand new episode. Today we have Gifford Kasen as our special guest, and Gifford owns Logan Square Tattoo in Chicago, Illinois. Gifford is a really interesting guy, really cool guy. He does some super unique biomech, bioorganic style tattooing, and focuses on a lot of other disciplines like oil painting, and in fact, that was what a good bit of our conversation was about, is the importance in his mind and in mine of exploring other mediums so that you can kind of draw from mediums that force you to make marks that a tattoo machine does not make. And that kind of brings a lot of new perspectives into your tattooing. And so we talk about that. We talk about bio tattooing, quite a few different things. Also, Gifford is going to be doing a technique talk for the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club coming up in May. If you're not familiar with technique talks, they're kind of like podcasts, except for it's just club members. We're all in a Zoom call together, and someone will come in, like Gifford, an expert in what they do, and share their process. So instead of talking about theory like we do a lot in the podcast and the YouTube version of our podcast, the technique talks dive a little deeper into technique. Obviously, a lot of times it's the tools that the person is using and their approach to tattooing, and we get a little more into the nuts and bolts because we're confident that everyone that is on the call is an actual tattooer. Another great thing about the technique talks is instead of me just asking whatever questions come to my mind, you get to jump in with me and ask questions or share your thoughts, which is a lot of fun. So if you have any interest in that, you can click wherever the corner is that has the information on the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club, and you can join us for that talk. If for some reason you're watching this episode after May of 2025, you can still catch the replay when you sign up for Inside Fireside. You get access to all of our previously recorded content. There's lots of cool stuff that we do. I won't go into it here. What else? Inside Fireside Yacht Club. You're going to want to join me on that. That is a tattoo excursion that is happening in June in Heber Springs, Arkansas. You'll hang out on my boat, 43-foot motor yacht in beautiful Greer's Ferry Lake. Andy Chambers, who's one of my favorite tattooers, is going to come and join us, and he's going to be teaching some illustrative painting, illustrative tattooing, illustrative design stuff. I'm going to be teaching some plein air oil painting stuff, and we're going to be hanging out on the boat, riding around on jet skis, jumping off of cliffs, drinking cold beers, stuff like that. Anyways, enjoy the episode. Thank you to Gifford for taking the time, and I'll see you at the end. Maybe we could kick it off with just for folks who don't know, like your kind of drawing background, tattooing background, where you came from, and then we'll get into maybe how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, so I started tattooing when I was like 20. I apprenticed in a shop in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and drawing background. Yeah, I was always just drawing like record covers and flyers and stuff for punk bands and just doing stuff like that. That was back in 2004 or so. So I've been tattooing about 20 years. And
Gotcha.
no real formal art training at that point. Since then, I did, a bunch of years of atelier study in Chicago, and, really kind of learned drawing through just tattooing and working with other tattooers.
So you didn't have much formal art training on the front end. You just kind of drew a lot in high school and had friends that were in bands and kind of got into like making a living off of art that way.
Yeah, pretty much. And then, when I got into my apprenticeship, they sort of kicked my ass into shape to at least learn how to copy stuff well. And, I always had my inspirations that I was trying to like work towards. And it was really like when I moved to Chicago, I started working with Marco Velasquez here, and I had some other friends that were really helping me a lot doing like the biomech thing and learn how to draw that stuff. And then I got in the formal art training to learn like classical drawing, stuff like that.
What prompted the move to Chicago?
I had from Milwaukee, I went off to Portland for like a year and was back in 2010, and it was just, I always wanted to do biomech. There wasn't really any of that going on out there. So I wasn't picking up much. It was a lot of traditional style work, and it was just hard to break into that scene too. So work was just slow. Um, Chicago, I had a girlfriend here, so I moved back for that, and then it was just like a really good fit right away. I got into a good studio, and it was close enough to Milwaukee where I was able to pull clients from there and build clientele pretty quickly. And it just like kind of opened everything up tattooing wise for me. So
And you were focused on kind of bio. That was something you were into from even before you were tattooing. Was kind of bioorganic
yeah,
style.
yeah, like high school, I was real into HRG gear and that kind of stuff, and especially all the like kind of punk metal art, and then when I got into tattooing and saw Guy Aitchison and Aaron Kane and all of that, it's like, yeah, that's what I want to do. So uh, it's a hard style to learn how to draw, and especially if you like don't understand how to like break it down. So yeah, it was really moving here, working with Marco, and then I was pretty good friends with Jeff Croce at the time too. So that dude will talk your ear off about anything, and kind of show you what you're doing wrong. So those guys helped me out a lot and developing that.
Yeah, and I would imagine, especially at that time, that was a little pre social media, so you didn't see so many variations of styles and bio work or biomechanical, bioorganic, or all these different things. And so it was, in my mind, I never approached it that much back then because I always felt like I would look like a secondhand version of Guy or Aaron or Ty McEwen or someone like that, because I just didn't know that many people who did it well. So I never really attempted it,
Yeah, and that was it's so goofy in that style. It's like you're gonna be a second tier Guy or Aaron for a little bit because you got to learn how to draw. Like, you don't come out of the gate with your own style. I mean, you shouldn't. In any other style of tattooing, if like you try to do traditional with your own spin on it without learning how to do it, everyone feel like, get out of here, dude. So, but there's there's that mentality in it where it's like, if you don't have an original take on it immediately, or you're some sort of poser or something.
Right.
But
yeah, that's a tough thing to overcome, And I saw an interesting little clip, and I don't know who it was from, but that popped up on my Instagram the other day, and it was about basically that, about artists kind of forgetting that we're working for a client, and the goal is to please, is to make stuff that we're proud of, and that shows that we're growing to ourselves and that our clients are happy with. But we get so caught up in the idea of what other artists are going to think about it. If the photo is nice enough, if the reel is catchy enough, and so we end up, a lot of us, not even sharing our work out of fear for what our peers will think about it, rather than like sharing the work for the sake of the client who's really happy to to be wearing it.
Yeah, I still struggle with that. I'm like, I don't, this isn't someone is going to call me out on not doing this well enough. But, I'm proud of it, and the client's really stoked on it. So what do I care if it's not like correct in the tattoo sense of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I still struggle with it.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and I really hadn't even thought that much about it being a big deal until I heard the person say it out loud. And I wish I could credit them. I don't know who it was, but I thought, yeah, I do that all the time. I take photos or videos of tattoos, and then I go to like post it, and I go like, yeah, I'll probably wait until the next session to put that one up because I didn't get this far, or I didn't get to push that as far as I wanted. So I like hold off on sharing anything, because I don't feel like it's to the level of what I want, like other tattooers to see coming from me. Whereas what I really should be concerned with was showing off for the client. Like, clients love to see their work posted,
Yeah, totally. I've started just making a point to like try to edit photos from every session and send it to the clients afterwards. Just so I'm like, hey, like I'm proud of what we're doing here, even if I'm not sharing it right now. But I want you to know that like every step of the way, I'm trying to care about it, and hopefully that's doing that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure, and I try to do the same. I do share with them directly, but I do have clients that are like, "Wow, you don't ever post photos of my work," and it's like, "Well, I'm going to post it when everything's finished. I'm trying not to post as much in progress or whatever." I'll come up with an excuse like that,
Yeah.
but it's like, really, the fact is, I just haven't gotten it to a point that I'm happy enough with it that I want everyone to see it. But I don't want to say that though.
Yeah. I mean, that's always it though, or you don't get the healed photo or whatever, and you're just like, it's not perfect, and you beat yourself up for that. So,
Yeah, yeah. What do you think? You were talking about the uh, going back to bio. What do you think the kind of common issues that beginning artists have with that style? Or you don't have to stick to bio, but since that's what you're doing a lot of, what do you think the kind of most like the beginner mistakes are in that?
yeah, they're looking at all the candy on top, and they want to do that. So they're just focusing on that cool detail, and they lose track of like the form. That's what really makes it work is the layering and the structure on the body, and how the forms interact together, a good balance of shapes and form. Uh, and that's you can break that down to really just like really simplify it and explain that to someone. But if they don't get that, then they're just they're doing the cool little glowy thing, and that's what I like how that glows. I want to put that everywhere, and it just kind of looks. It doesn't look like it glows. It looks bad. So I think that's in biomech in particular. Um, there's I took a seminar from the painter David Shevitz this last year, and
Great painter.
yeah, and he really broke it down. He's like he wants there to be one like main thing in his paintings that is it looks super cool. It's like very precious almost, and all your attention is drawn to it. He's got a lot going on in his paintings, but it's really obvious what the main thing is. So I think that the person that doesn't understand how to get there, they just see that main thing and they focus on doing that, and they don't understand that like all the other stuff around it that like builds the structure of the piece is what makes that thing look really precious. So
Yeah.
but it was a lot like that, because there's like these cool little spots. But if you don't have all the other things in place, it falls flat.
Right. I don't know if I bought an online course from him, or if I just watched him do a demo or something years back. I really love his paintings, but he had an interesting process that was kind of backwards to me, in that he went ahead and chunked up, like very heavily laid in the focal point, like the lightest, brightest tone in this. I believe it was like kind of an abstract cityscape. It wasn't like his still life stuff. It was something more cityscapey, but he went ahead and punched all the lightest stuff right from the back and just piled paint up like this really intense pigment right where he wanted everything, and then kind of built off of that, like it surrounded it with everything else, which I would think is the exact opposite way to sneak up on that.
Yeah.
Did he do that? Is that how he did it in your workshop?
Yeah, pretty much. He started with like just some like block-ins of shapes. He was experimenting with this, working from the imagination technique. So just like really abstract shapes, and then kind of determining what the focus is going to be. But once he's done that and said like this part is going to be the focus, yeah, he just goes right in on it and tries to really start making it loud right away.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was, and I guess in tattooing, a lot of times people have such different approaches nowadays. I still kind of have a general to specific approach where I like to lay in the whole thing. Either if I'm just gray lining and I separate my light and shadow shapes, and then I typically let that heal and come back and start to punch up detail and introduce color and all of that. And then of course you have people now that work like a printer and just are like finishing little areas and rendering fully kind of as they go. What's your kind of, how have you translated any of that into your tattooing? What's your approach?
I mixed it up. It depends on the piece. For like bigger stuff, which is primarily what I'm working on, I'll have the concept developed as like a drawing or painting or something, and I'll go in with that. And the first session is usually just like really loosely mapping as much of it in as I can. So really light, quick lines that don't necessarily look great, or just like making in like the big shapes. And and then kind of refining from there for the most part. Sometimes I do want just real clean lines from the get-go and just kind of approach it that way. Uh, I'll do the kind of printer thing if it's like a, a smaller, not the kind of work that I'm generally known for. I like that. It's more like a painting to me. How I'd approach painting, but people don't ask me for that stuff a lot. It's whatever works the best for the piece. So I think if you're doing big work, you kind of gotta like just go fast and loose. Loose, you don't want to be like a disaster on there, but get it in there, get the idea in there, and then kind of build it up. And the same way as I would approach a painting, like everything shouldn't look super perfect. Like I like some messiness to it, so that you can have those areas where it's like really tight and refined, and that's going to give more attention to that area.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like you've got, like kind of an illustrative, a very illustrative version of a bio style, and kind of a mixed, because it might be bio that forms into something that's representational, like floral or something,
Yeah.
along those lines. How did that? Is that something that just kind of, was that intentional, or was that something that evolved kind of naturally, or came from some of your fine art? We haven't talked much about your atelier background or any of that. Like, where did that kind of stuff come from?
The illustration really came from working with Jeff and Marco on that stuff. They're both, I would say, out of like they kind of learned, not learned, but had Aaron Kane as like their big influence. So if you were to go back to where biomech became popular and sort of the different branches of it, you had Guy doing the more painterly stuff, which is what I was originally attracted to, where it's like real soft and you have these like really bold parts. And then you had this like super aggressive illustrative look that Aaron was doing, and everyone kind of out of that camp. Obviously not just Aaron, there's other people kind of building that style, but so working with Jeff and Marco and seeing how they did it, it was just like, well, that makes more sense. You just like can get it in there fast, and it reads, and the way that I actually draw, I think that fits better for it. I was getting too in the weeds, not using like outlines and stuff like that. So, and I just sort of like developed it more and more from there. So the painting, the fine art side of thing, when it comes into my tattooing, it's more in terms of like color theory or developing form within those outlines. I still like using outlines quite a bit. I think they're, for tattooing, they make sense to me, rather than just all doing it all with just like high contrast and no lines.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's important to think about contrast in all aspects of it, right? So like shape contrast, and then value kind of contrast, and then also edge contrast. So like doing some big, you look at someone like Ty McEwen, I think is a good example. He'll have this big foreground shape that has an outline that looks like that looks like it was done with a 23 mag. It's just this big, heavy, chunky, outline, and then other stuff that has like no kind of lines at all, but it's kind of framed with these big, bold, chunky lines. And I think that allows some of that other stuff to kind of fall apart even and still hold together because of that.
Yeah. I was working on one of our client. He's worked on a bunch this last weekend and seen some like it's impressive to me. I wish I could have that level of restraint with how he uses lines, but he does. Like he puts them in just pretty perfectly for like the size he's using, and then pulling back and not overly detailing stuff with that. So I mean, he's working big enough where he can really get away with that. So yeah, he's a great example of that.
That's that's an interesting point that you make there. When you're doing really large covering really large areas, and you can use these big kind of sweeping shapes to drive attention, and you can probably get away with a lot more than if you're just trying to do like a calf piece, in bioorganic. I feel like that could get noisy and confusing a lot easier than like a whole back or ribs or full sleeve or any of that. Do you approach the style differently when you're working on smaller versions, or do you work on much smaller biomech stuff?
I'll usually be like, let's not, like, maybe we'll put some texture or something in there. But if you want all of those, like the layers and the like little tiny forms and stuff, probably don't do it too small. Like, I mean, I've done that and it's always like this should have been a whole arm and not part of a leg or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So usually people hear that though. At this point, I could show them, but if they're coming to me, they've seen my work and I could say, hey, if you only want this much done, that's okay, but we got to focus on something that isn't what I would do in a whole sleeve. And that's sort of where I started getting into doing more representational stuff within the style, because then you can make a piece that is this big and it still looks good. You have like a thing.
Yeah.
Have to be like a bunch of abstract stuff. It's important that you're giving everything context. So if you're using just a bunch of shapes, you need to have a lot of those shapes repeating through the piece, or enough where your brain looks at it and can read it as what it's, a pattern or something. So if it's tiny, you don't have room for 10 different things to go in there. You have like one and then some sort of background element. I mean, same with any style of tattooing, right? Like, you don't want 10 things in a piece the size of a calf. It'll just look like a mess.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes good sense. Adding, kind of introducing the representational stuff and using the abstract, using the bio as more of a framing element or something that gives it an environment, but it's not necessarily meant to be the focal point, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, going back to kind of some of the stuff outside of tattooing, you're working with, or have been for a while, working with Dan, who helps us here with Fireside. He's the moderator of our tattoo club, and you've been helping him, and I've been looking at some of his drawings, and I think he went in thinking it was kind of like learning to draw for tattoos. I don't know that he did, but that's kind of what I thought it was going to be going in. But he's doing a lot of very simple shape studies, single light source types of stuff. What's your approach in helping someone like Dan to kind of learn? His goal is obviously to be a tattooer at some point.
Yeah. So something that I found with people that come in and ask for like apprenticeships, or to learn how to tattoo is, for me, I struggle with them not knowing the language to talk to them, or even other tattooers that are good artists and everything. If they don't have like foundational training, it's kind of hard to explain something well. So what I've started doing is kind of just doing a basic atelier style training with him and some other people from my studio when they're interested, so that they can get those foundations and like create the language. And then when you start getting to more complex things, they understand what you're saying, and you can help develop them along that way. I think obviously most tattooers don't do that, and I wouldn't say it's like necessary. Obviously, like there's other languages that work, but just for me to like kind of cut to the point on things, it makes the most sense to do it. And when I'm like critiquing people, I want to, if I'm saying a bunch of stuff that they don't understand, then it's a bad critique. So in order to get the communication belt, they got to understand those fundamental techniques.
Yeah. And I think it does help to dial in and sorting drawing problems based on like principles, like universal kind of principles of drawing, rather than like getting too in the weeds with like whether it's technique or tattoo-y kind of stuff, or got like just being able to like tranche out problems and say, okay, this is a problem of shapes, competing shapes, or this is a color issue, or this is a problem with edges. So at least you can say, like, you can like drop it into these buckets, and then in my opinion that really simplifies problems, because you can go back and say, if you know that shapes are the biggest deal you have to deal with first, because we're like drawing to shape, we're drawing to the body, at least in tattooing, like, okay, the first problem we have to deal with is a shape, because the shape is predetermined. We have no control over it. Where it's going is where it's going. The surrounding tattoos are what they are. So let's deal with shapes, and then let's deal with values. And then, so I like to break it down that way because I feel like it really simplifies drawing problems.
Yeah. And then also, I found if you're drawing from life, which is what we're doing here, all the information's right there. So if you want to explain something, you can just kind of pull them over and be like, here, look at this. Let's do some comparisons. This is what you have on your piece, but this is what's actually here. And, I can break down probably where the problem was and how you got there, and then think about this, moving forward. And like, for me, that was just like a really helpful way to learn. So I think that, I think Dan's benefiting from, I can see he's making a lot of progress with it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
What about if and when it comes to, I know that you aren't necessarily apprenticing Dan, you're helping him with drawing, but have you applied this approach to helping people with in more of an atelier or traditional kind of like drawing from life way, and how to adapt that to tattooing? Or have you, I guess you've adapted that to your own tattooing? Like, how do you like reconcile the two? Is the goal that you're, they're learning these drawing principles, and you're learning to represent what you see, reproduce what you see accurately, and then that will kind of Mr. Miyagi its way into being able to draw, tattoo designs?
Yeah, that would be the goal. I haven't successfully done that with anyone. And even myself, like, I it's kind of like two different paths. Like, this is my fine art and this is my tattooing. But yeah, you kind of see stuff starts to leak through. I just finished an apprenticeship with someone who's my only apprentice I've had that has seen it all the way through. They came in from art school, so they already had a lot of the language, so we didn't go through all of that. They don't have like a classical atelier style, but just like being able to break stuff down, they were able to see that. And the focus was primarily in drawing for tattoos, and they have a very illustrative style. So they are already kind of there with that. But if we're talking about, lighting, shadows, block in, form, all of that, they already understand that stuff. So, yeah.
I've seen a lot of progress in Dan's work, in the stuff that he's doing, with you. They're drawing from life and all that. But then a lot of times, we do a monthly drawing challenge here at the Tattoo Club every month, and a lot of it, is kind of intended to be invented. Like we're inventing subject matter for particular areas of the body, and Dan does love to draw out of his head. He's like kind of his thing. And so what I've found when we do the critiques is sometimes it seems like he's learning and applying the stuff he's learning with you, and other times he defaults back into the way that he was drawing this time last year.
Yeah, and that's I don't want to. You never want to like break someone out of that, because I think that's important to keep that sort of like a imaginative approach to drawing, and it's fun, and you want them to like develop their own style and everything. I guess when he shows, because he'll show me drawings sometimes then, and I will say either here, take some of what we talk about with like shadow and form and all of that and simplify it. Here's what you've drawn. So try to break it down into the just lights and darks so that it becomes a more readable image. Or, sometimes people get, I think, too in their heads about it too, because they start thinking about like, well, how should this really look? It's a made up thing. But, and I think that's like a struggle. I mean, I still have that. If you get too in your head about it, you got to kind of be like, hey, it just has to look good. So it doesn't have to always, make the most amount of sense, as long as it reads well and looks good. So I think that's somewhere you get when you are doing both. You eventually start being able to like reconcile, like it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to kind of like try to explain the form that you're drawing.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. I think probably all of us struggle with it, where we're just trying to. You feel like you need to describe everything, like everything needs to be clear to the viewer. When really, a lot of the times, I find myself asking, like, how little can I get away with describing to get the point across? Or if I find myself doing too much, it's like, how much can I take away and still get the point across? And a lot of times, it's just removing elements until you kind of say like, okay, these major things are working. Where I'm losing it is where the hand goes backwards and we're like, this is where things aren't making sense. So do I even need to tell that part of the story?
Yeah, yeah. Like less is more is probably a good rule of thumb for most design, But
Yeah.
we want we want to do the candy. We want to like show off that we understand everything and can draw everything as perfectly as possible, but it doesn't always lead to the best piece of art.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know you've got to wrap up here in the next 5 or 10 minutes or so. Is there any? We were talking, and one of the main points with you coming on was the importance of exploring sort of outside of tattooing, which is what we've spent some time on. Do you have any kind of ideas or tips for people who wanted to, that maybe find themselves in a tattoo rut, maybe have never drawn from life? I think that's the vast majority of tattooers probably that don't see the value in taking time to do life studies, figure studies, simple still lifes, any of that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
I mean, I would do something that you haven't done before and see if it is giving you any inspiration and approach it seriously. Find someone that can help, take a class. If you got someone in person, if you're in a city where there's people that are teaching stuff like that, like go out and do it. Whether it's like painting or photography or any sort of creative endeavor. I think that's really important to get you out of your comfort zone and just pursue something else that like kicks off that inspirational spark in you.
Yeah.
And you can find that, in anything, but you got to go out and look for it and get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. Sometimes the hardest part is to kind of is to wake up curious, right? Whenever you just know that you draw the things that you draw and the appointment is tomorrow and I have to finish the drawing today, your curiosity kind of it kind of leaves me sometimes where I'm just like, I'm not necessarily always trying to explore and find something that's really exciting and new and engaging when it comes to drawing on my iPad for a tattoo.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, to your point, if we go out and play with creating, like my son and I, we got a couple of cool cameras. We go out and play with creating little like silly short films or taking photographs. Or I'm a terrible watercolor painter, plein air watercolor. If I start to make marks with things that don't, with tools that don't make the same marks as a pencil or a tattoo machine, then you're kind of it naturally kind of like piques your curiosity, I think.
Yeah. And I would say like make the space to fail at something, I think as tattooers, it's like, I got to draw for the client or to have some flash, something I can sell. Cause that's, and it's just day in, day out with that. So, I try to have a day a week where I could just work on, paintings or some sort of creative thing that like, it might suck. It might never go anywhere and I might, experiment and it just like, I don't know, I'll learn something from it. It might've been fun doing it, but it's not ever going to amount to anything. But that, is how you find the next thing that maybe does. And you start looking forward to that time.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And I think that is important to having no real expectation of the result. Whereas when we're drawing for tattoos, we have a real expectation of the result because we depend on that. But with using tools and working in mediums that you aren't familiar with and you don't have any sort of expectation, you get to be a little curious. For me, whenever I first started drawing digitally, I found that, when I started using brush pens and things like on an iPad or on a Cintiq that didn't make the same marks as my pencil, I found that it changed the way that I might approach line weights in a wing for a bird, like an illustrative wing or something like that, because I'm using a tool that like ends in a chisel. It starts and tapers out wide, whereas I would naturally do it the other way if I was drawing it with pencil. But it just makes a different mark, and you're like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. I could probably use that mark, but I would have never found it without jumping into a tool that I hadn't used before.
Yeah, I mean and it'll all end up coming back into your tattooing as long as you're not super rigid in your tattooing. But if you're open to trying new things, and that's how your style progresses, and you kind of develop your own voice. And then everyone's gonna copy you, and it it won't be original anymore. But
Right.
that's the name of the game. So
Yeah.
you keep doing it. You keep if you're pulling from stuff that is from outside of what everyone's looking at on Instagram, and you're just like being curious and trying to find things that you find joy in, you're gonna always just have new things that people will be like, wow, I wish I was creative. And it's like it's sort of creative, but it's really just it's more being curious and experimenting, and then accidents happen and follow those.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you traveling much are you tattooing at shows and stuff? I know you own the shop that you're in, right? So what's your life look like from that
Um,
standpoint?
I'm doing Hell City this year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I usually do that. I'm doing one of the Milwaukee conventions. Maybe I'll do another one. Every year I'm like, I want to do one or two like bigger shows to get out there. But it's a full studio that I'm running, and it's taking a lot of time right now. So for this year, it is like, just with the way everything's going, it's like I gotta kind of be all business about it, and then we'll see. I might take a step back from that at some point. I've been doing that for 10 years, and I think I would like to be more focused on my own artistic pursuits for the next phase of my career.
Yeah.
But I've said that before, and then things start going really nice and easy again, and you're like, running a tattoo shop isn't that bad.
Hey, thanks again for watching. Thank you to Gifford for taking the time. Again, if you'd like to learn more from Gifford, he will be doing a technique talk in May. You can learn more about that by checking out the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club, Yacht Club, all the stuff that I said at the beginning. Just think about it again right now. That is it. Thank you, as always, for supporting what we do, and I will see you in the next episode.